Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It is truly a pleasure to be at this first ever meeting. The World Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce is hosting an amazing forum. I am so pleased to be a part of it. Thank you for including me today. It's great to be back in Taiwan. I want to thank President Tsai Ing-wen for her help. Mr. Vice President, it's been great to spend time with you as well. Thank you for your kindness to me. Thanks to other top members of the Executive Yuan and Legislative Yuan for all of you being here today as well. And it's great to be out of Taipei and be back in this great place, Southern Taiwan. I understand that I'm the first Secretary of State ever to travel to visit this beautiful part of the country. I had to wait till I was an unemployed former diplomat to do so, but I am happy to be with you all here today. I'm most excited for the days ahead because I will get to spend the time with you all. It's wonderful to meet with government officials. They are important. They make policy. They drive change. But I know I am among friends in the Taiwanese business community. Your warmth and generosity, your hospitality has benefited me and my country. It feels a bit like when I go back to my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. Another great place where manufacturing for the global community takes place. Frankly, I think any American who came here would feel at home. It's a culture that is certainly different from our own, but I think every American would see the fundamental similarities between our two places as well. He would see today, as with you, a creative society like their own, one with real rule of law, basic property rights, free market capitalism, and a central understanding as democracy as a pillar for our nation's strength. He would see a people with a deep love of liberty who know the value and the costs associated with freedom and the risks that that entails. This idea, this shared love of liberty, especially enriches our business ties. What will drive our continued success. I think it's why, no matter who is in power in each of our two countries, that the depth and breadth and scope of our business relationships has and will continue. I want to speak to you today from my heart. Those of you who contribute to the business community and that support our two economies and promote our free and fair trade between both America and Taiwan. Look, some aren't so pleased to see Americans come here to promote our treasured bonds. They claim that Taiwan is not free, but is, always has been, and always will be a part of the so-called People's Republic of China. I'm pretty familiar with these claims, as many of you know today. I was able to travel here, but could not have traveled there. I have a fundamentally different view, one which I've spoken of many times. It is the reality that many of your past and present leaders have made clear. It is that Taiwan does not need to declare its independence because it is already an independent nation. One of the things from my time as Secretary of State I was most proud of is that I moved the people of the United States and our government closer to recognizing this simple political, diplomatic, and sovereign reality. Now, setting aside politics for a second, the fact is that no American who visits Taiwan and China would mistake either of these places for being the same country. One is free, one is not. One is an ally of the United States, the other is a repressive adversary. We recognize this basic fact in the Trump administration and started moving American policy towards a greater understanding and recognition of that. As a Secretary of State, I sent one of my most senior leaders, the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs. He covered economics and business relationships. I sent him here. It was deeply intentional and echoes the very reason that I'm here on this trip. He was one of the highest-ranking senior executive officials to visit the country in recent memory, but importantly, he represented the economic ties between our two places. As the Vice President mentioned, I also got rid of countless, pointless, endless, silly diplomatic rules that Washington had in place. denying Taiwanese diplomats their rightful place in America. It was no doubt in my mind that friendly democracies and their diplomats should be able to talk and collaborate and meet freely wherever it was they chose to meet, including in the building where I had my office. Practically every electronic device in the world has something that comes from this place. Phones, laptops, so many things that are so central to the world's existence today depend on electronics that come from right here, right in this region. I knew that getting our diplomatic ties was an imperative for Americans' economy and America's national security. We'll say this too. I think this is unmistakable and important, undeniable. China's aggressive conduct, diplomatically, militarily, economically, they have waged a war, an economic war on America for decades, have changed this region, and have brought those who prefer peace and commerce even more closely together. Taiwan has increased its defense budget, and U.S.-Taiwanese relations have grown in important ways. Even today, as we are here, as the state funeral for former Prime Minister Abe is being held, we can see that Japan is finally and necessarily discussing increases to its defense budget so that it may be nearly twice what it historically has been. Australia, too, is working on building out its nuclear-powered submarines to make its naval power more capable in the region, deeply relevant to restoring the deterrence that is so necessary here in the Pacific. There are also incredible signs, important signs of increased economic cooperation as well. I graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point just a decade after the fall of Saigon. As a young lieutenant, I would have been dubious of any claims that Vietnam and the United States might one day cooperate on as many issues as we do today. But 2 years ago, as Secretary of State, I visited Hanoi and had warm and collaborative discussions on important security and economic issues. Many of you know firsthand about the opportunities. The Vice President spoke of them for business throughout Southeast Asia. It will help tie your region together and increase your prosperity here as well. I think what the Chinese Communist Party is doing has caused your neighbors to fundamentally rethink the relationships they have and the practices that they have put in place for decades. Taiwan and the United States together can work to continue this and be deep leaders in forging these new relationships with Southeast Asia. This forum, your gathering, is part of what we know to be a historic shift that we are seeing in global trade and international security. I led the senior cabinet agency in the United States that began working on this historic shift. I knew, we knew, our team knew that the hopes for political and economic security improvements from engaging China had not met even the most minimal objective. It was well beneath the expectations of those who had been my predecessors as Secretary of State. Along with President Trump and other members of our National Security Council, we asked ourselves some just fundamental questions. There were 4 of them. I answered these questions, Secretary of State, and I'll repeat my conclusions here for you all today. America must admit a hard truth, a truth that should guide us as the years and decades ahead. If we want a free 21st century, and not the Chinese century, the century which Xi Jinping dreams of, the old paradigm of blind engagement must end. Engagement with China simply will not get that done. America must choose instead to engage with China realistically and on our terms, the terms of freedom. This includes deeper and far more enthusiastic relationship with Taiwan. The decision that President Trump made changed our security calculus too, to be sure. But it also changed our trade calculus, our economic calculus. This was inevitable. This was inevitable, for there are 2 closely linked, our security and our economics. We implemented tariffs on more than half of our imports from China, taking great care not to impact consumers or disrupt the supply chain. We also implemented export controls, not enough, but on state but on state-of-the-art semiconductors, which also affected Taiwanese semiconductors that the U.S. tools in its fabrication facilities. The result was not a decoupling from China by the United States or Taiwan, but a turning point, a change, one deeply fundamental. And more than the immediate impact that this had on trade, it was a signal, an expression of American economic will, that the economic status quo that was benefiting the Chinese Communist Party for the preceding 2 decades must and would be changing. This change will continue, partly because of what governments will do, but largely because of the actions that you all will take. It will benefit both Taiwan and the United States, and we must seize the opportunities that lie ahead. I'm confident, standing here today, that you all are prepared, alongside American business leaders, to do just that. In the U.S., it's common to hear that the USA is withdrawing from the region and is not as committed to protecting Taiwan as it was under the Trump administration. Detractors point to both skepticism of globalism and free trade in both parties in the United States, and that's partly true. America's ongoing rising security commitments in Europe, given Putin's invasion of Ukraine, are something that's on many people's minds. I think these highlight the muddled and confusing statements by President Biden. I'm confused too. Concerning America's true commitment to Taiwan, the ambiguity that had been American policy has now become even more ambiguous. This concerns me greatly. It concerns many of you here today as well, I know that. But you should know this. As for America's commitment, continuing our trade relationship, continuing free trade, I think that it is as strong as ever. Americans have not grown skeptical of free markets and increasing America's capacity for good in the world through more and free trade, especially with democracies like this one. Rather, what I think you're seeing is that after decades of naive engagement with China, Americans have recognized that there was nothing free nor fair about that trade. This truth is essential. No matter the country, no matter the deal, trade with China has been and likely will not be in the near future remotely free. Free trade. Fair trade for the world is impossible to achieve with countries that do not respect the rule of law, basic property rights, the capacity to enforce agreements. When a country is built on the theft of intellectual property, they will turn inside and abuse their own workers and commit genocide as well. The good news here today is that Taiwan is completely different. It is the opposite of China in every one of those central respects. It's why our trade relationship's not only good, but a model for free trade around the world. America and other free nations should pursue strategic decoupling with China. I want to talk forward. I want to talk about what is in front of each and every one of us. You know, there's been talk of a U.S.-Taiwan trade agreement to build ties and bolster our relationship for an awfully long time. That idea was innovative when it was first proposed back in the 1970s. And while that deal has remained elusive, it's become the de facto reality today. I am counting on you. When governments are slow, private sector business leaders will move more quickly. I can feel it in this room today. One of my heroes, American heroes, Ronald Reagan, once said that the best minds are not in government. If they were, you all would steal them away. I can tell you that from personal experience, having run a manufacturing company in Wichita, Kansas for a decade, and now having served in government for about a decade as well. Politics is often an awful lot of talk with too little action. Take the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific economic framework. It is very unclear to me what, if anything, the framework will achieve other than diplomatic talk and coffee in salons in the region. When I look at the framework, I frankly don't see a lot of economic potential. I see the Biden administration foolishly sidelining its 8th biggest trading partner, Taiwan, and they're doing so for political reasons. This was made in spite of the fact that Taiwan made perfectly clear that it wants to be involved. I would also point out that India made it pretty clear that it will not participate in the trade portion of this framework, so there goes the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific framework. I said it before, you've all seen this with governments all across the world. Politics is often just a lot of talk. It is the level of business, economic exchange, risk-taking, entrepreneurs prepared to commit their own capital, where good things happen first and most often, and great minds meet. The industries of our two nations will build our relationship closer, and our security relationship will be built on that rock of a foundation. I've had two different lives, a business life and now a life in government service. I had enormous responsibility in each. And I learned that if you want to get things done, trust your business leaders, your innovators, people who are taking risk and who have real skin in the game. If you're in government, your job is to make it easier for them to do so, to be successful. That's why, in place of what is some grandiose, ideal understanding of an agreement, I believe both our countries should pursue the practical steps, the real steps, the tangible steps that they can to make it even easier for Americans and Taiwanese to do business together, just as this forum is doing today. We should ask ourselves, is it easy for expats to get business licenses, visas, open bank accounts, incorporate, get loans, all the fundamentals of blocking and tackling? Can we use credit ratings that come from our two countries and the other country? These are things that make business more successful and take down barriers, reduce friction, and increase opportunity by lowering costs and returning value. I want to tell you what I've also told investors across the region, from Singapore to Japan. While I understand past investment in China, indeed, our country encouraged American companies to invest there. This investment came not only from our country, but from Asia as well. It's time to put our money where the risk is the least. It's time to invest and put our capital, our attention elsewhere. I'm confident that governments, ours included, at the policy level will and should enact new political mechanisms to provide both political cover for these political decisions and, importantly, incentives for governments to make free market reforms on their own. Before we hit the pandemic, born in Wuhan, these reforms led to an economic boom that many said that was impossible in the United States of America. And now that we are all collectively coming out of the pandemic, I'm confident that those very policies, those freedom-loving properties, those possibilities, those property rights respecting policies will grow our relationship even deeper and increase that at an even faster rate. I think this growth will look different, deeply different than it has for past decades. It will not rely on the United States and other advanced economies exporting our manufacturing to China in exchange for cheap consumer goods, but instead it will be with the rest of the region, here and in Southeast Asia, that will help America grow its own economy. It won't be due solely to a shift in American outsourcing. Rather, it will be based on your strong business fundamentals, your innovation, your creativity, your prosperity, the things that you do well here. When I stare at the economies across this region and the people who I have come to know in business, all the signs, every single sign is extremely positive. I see here in Taiwan a young and incredibly aggressive, innovative people. I see the rule of law and free markets flourishing. I see a government that is focused on common sense infrastructure. And instead of causing increases in cost and dreaming up new ways to increase the cost of energy as the West has done, you sought affordable energy for businesses too. Bless you. Thank you for that. It is a model to the world. These are just a couple of reasons that I'm optimistic this morning, that it is in the best interest of the United States and Taiwan to work together, and the reason that I want to stand alongside you and the people of Taiwan. Our two nations will always share vital ties, important ties. You are on the front line of freedom today. May we continue to grow our economic ties. May we continue to work on our security ties, and when we do that together, we will expand freedom in this region and across the world. Thank you, God bless you, and have a great forum.
Thank you so much.